And we are live. Welcome to another episode of FreudenFreude, our weekly live. Hi, Sandra.
Yeah, how are you?
Great, great. Just so excited to be here. Hello, Felicia.
Hi, Felicia.
Nice to meet you. You are on mute at this point. Why don't we just get started with the meeting, and we will ask you to chime in later if you feel like it. Is that fine? Okay. Please allow me just for a second to turn your video up just for the minute. That is not a, a sign of disrespect. Let's just maybe set the stage, Sandra and I, why we do this. So, Sandra, today we have actually selected a topic about learning from failure. Learning from failure. Is that something that's near and dear to your heart? Tell me a little bit about it.
Oh, wow. Many times. I think if if there's no understanding of what it means to actually touch bottom, because that's for a lot of us what it means, touch bottom, meaning that you are in a situation where there's nowhere to go. And you finally realize that the only way to go is really just moving forward. Yeah, there's no other way. So yes, it is close to my heart for the past 3 years of my life. But that's the only way. But that's the only way. Yes.
Yeah, because for many of us, actually, especially through the education systems that we come through, this realization is like a major aha moment of our lives, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I mean, actually, for those that just now joined the live or are here with us, it's like we talked before we went on camera, how sometimes we just have to show up and try to do our best. That failure is indeed an option. Gee whiz. But, it is only to the extent to which you are then able to learn from it, right? So if we take a life like this and it really goes haywire at some point, we learn from it, people. Okay, so bear with us. We are trying our best. Okay, no, but see, the thing is, I think that, yes, the big learnings often require in very painful, big investment kind of contexts, but nevertheless, even this micro learning, this everyday kind of stretch, this leaning into new things, it's an everyday kind of thing. This learning from failure. Failure doesn't need to be this life-changing event, I think. It's just these things that don't go exactly how we wanted to, because maybe we should start off, and then we can also bring Felicia in. Maybe start off by putting some words to what we mean by failure, really, because it seems already that you and I have a little bit of a different take on what failure really is. Sandra, do you want to take it from here? And Felicia, if you feel like being on camera, feel free to join us at this time. Thank you so much. Sandra, go from here, maybe. What's failure for you?
So I think for me, it's, I was going through a couple of material that I have out there about failure. And I think bottom line, for me, it has been a mix of curiosity and fear. I found myself many times saying, oh my God, what's going to happen if I fail, and you fail. You're like, okay, nothing happened. It didn't work out. That's really the word. It didn't work out. This is not the way to go, right? And so when you realize, okay, the next step is let's go this way, because now it's about curiosity. What didn't work out? What can work out? And so you go this route and you try it again. And so for me, I truly can't believe, I really do have to do this to say, how many times did I not try it? It's been many times. It's been many times that I tried it, that I tried to do things better. Then again, sometimes pause. When I say better, it's based on my neurodiversity. It's different for neurodiverse people that have to try it over and over and over until we get it at least good. Okay. And when we say good, it's because we've tried it many times. So we think it's the best we can do. So for me, it's I realize that we go through stages, right? There's like a stage in that process of failure. It's not so much about bargaining as much as it is doing this cognitive bias of, first you're like, you have this feeling of not being enough, right? The self-esteem issue. Like, what did I do? What went wrong? Blah, 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 blah. And then you go into, okay, so what would be different? And you start thinking about what would be different. And if you would have, if you could have, if you should have, right? And then you go down, and then you go up again, and you go thinking, well, vulnerability is not for me, where you say, you know what? If nobody else is talking about it, I can't talk about it, right? Because I cannot express or explain how bad it feels to mess up. So I better just suck it up and continue and go forward. And then again, you go back again under that little wheel of emotions. And then suddenly you start shifting blame in order for you to feel better. You start thinking, well, it wasn't really me, you start thinking it was really the team. If they would have listened, if they would have paid attention, if they would have done this and that and that. And you start now trying to feel better with yourself, right? And you start going into what I read, they called it illusory superiority, something like that. It's about when you shift blame onto other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's quite a commonly seen coping mechanism, right?
Exactly.
To kind of mitigate the whole discomfort and the whole.
Yeah, and then suddenly you're like, yes, and you feel good about yourself again, and you did it, and because it's all about protecting your self-esteem. It's about protecting who you are. It's about feeling good about yourself of what you decided and what you did. Otherwise, there's not another better way to cope with it. Because not a lot of us are willing to have this awareness of, I blame myself for what happened.
and maybe that is maybe at the crux of this entire thing. That why does it need to be blameful? Because when I think about failure, it is a mismatch of expectation. A mismatch of expectation. So here we are, and we want to go somewhere, and we expect things to turn out a certain way. Well, guess what? My expectations were wrong. I did all this thing. I went down this path, and gee whiz, it just didn't work out.
Yeah.
It depends, of course, on the situation, but why should that mismatch of expectation, that guess that you took, ultimately, why should you be blamed for that? Why should you blame yourself for that? At least you did something. Because I think that so much in life can be attributed to assumptions and expectations. Right? It's all these hypotheticals that go on in our life, right? And so what I didn't learn is, and that's for step number 2, but it's like, well, maybe my assumptions were wrong, my starting point, or my expectations were wrong, assumptions about the ending point. But what came to me in terms of learning and growth and so on this journey, because now at least I know what my expectations shouldn't be.
Mhm.
So, Felicia, would you maybe like to chime in here? Would love to hear your insights. And welcome so much. Welcome.
It's great to see both you ladies. For what you just said was exactly what I was thinking, Claudia, that it's disappointment in not achieving something that you have gone out to do. And when one can accept that it hasn't turned out that way, and to look at what has turned out, and as you say, not to blame oneself, not to blame others, but to look at the things that have been achieved versus what wasn't achieved. And the acceptance of what wasn't achieved is the hardest part, I think, for most people to deal with. And that's where failure comes into play for people. But I don't think and because I say that, I don't think there is such a thing as failure. I think it's something that we have put into our vocabulary in society, success and failure, because there is no success is non-existent too, right? Those two words are at opposite ends, and yet they're the same thing. We just must be. And when we can accept to be and to go forward with the way things go, and to take the action that is needed to get to where we want to go, and to accept that sometimes we might not get exactly where we want to be, then we find more inner peace with ourselves. So it's not about achieving success or having failed. It's just about finding the middle road.
Yeah.
And it's actually really, thank you for that. It's very, very nicely put. I think that our relationship with failure and just kind of black and white fixed mindset thinking also gets fostered to a very large degree in the educational system. And sorry if now I can only talk from my experience in a European and American kind of context. It's very possible other cultures, other countries might be different. But it's kind of like you get graded by getting points taken off for failure. Yeah, they never say, oh, you did so much well, you had 3/4 of the right answers. You had most of the right answers. It's like you made 2 mistakes. Yeah, so there's this very strong bias towards the negativity of failure. And I absolutely enjoy teaching, and I tutored quite a bit. And those were like end of high school, university level people. And it was very much in mathematics and computer science, because that's kind of where I come from my educational background. So we would do like this elaborate mathematical problem. And as soon as there was a mistake, they would take out the eraser and start erasing what they did wrong. And I'm like, stop erasing it. Look at it. It's telling you something. It's telling you what not to do. Take out your highlighter and highlight it and write in red next to it. This is where my brain wants to go, but it's not the right way. And figure out what prompted you to go that way, to assume that this was maybe the right theorem to apply or something like that. So there was always this like, oh, but it's terrible, and I have to erase this sign that I made a mistake, or that I went a wrong way, or they would tear out pages where they had made a mistake. Very, very strong. And incidentally, it's those that could come to grips that a failure was an opportunity to learn. It's those that ultimately did really, really well. And after a very short time, didn't need to come to tutoring anymore, because they learned to honor those ways, and also to recognize that those are pathways that might initially come very naturally to us, but that need to be course corrected. Very much like a path in a forest. right? Don't follow the path in the forest, make a new one and follow the new one all the time. But you only can do that if you follow signposts that you leave for yourselves, and your failures or your mistakes are the ones that show up those, put up those markers.
I'm really, really seriously thinking this one, because I had not thought about actually paying attention to your mistakes, because we all, like you said, we all want to erase them. We don't want to be judged. We don't want people to see that we made a mistake, because we're constantly always comparing ourselves. Even if the student is a student, he's constantly comparing himself with the teacher to say, how much is my knowledge, right? And so they want to do best. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. I never thought about comparing or sitting down and analyzing my mistakes, right? Like Einstein said, if we would spend more time thinking about the mistakes, we would probably be able to solve things better, instead of trying to focus on other things that probably just don't matter, right? And so I'm just, I kind of like that. I'm like, maybe that is a good lesson to learn. Sit on your mistakes for a while.
And I fully believe that that's the key to so much of it. Learn from the mistakes. That's where learning happens. Because very often where we are in control, there's often things that happen that are outside of our control, and that is where acceptance comes in, and changing approaches and being flexible and agile. But if you are in control of your path and your actions and your behavior towards something, if that one doesn't work out, then your way of approaching it needs to be adapted. It wasn't wrong. It just needs to be adapted. Your first way of doing it didn't work out, and maybe guess what? Your second or third and fourth might not work out. But unless you really keep track, I think it would be tricky. And actually, as coaches, we are kind of encouraged to have a reflective practice. And that is exactly what it is. What went right when it went right, but what also didn't go right when it went wrong. And how could we grow, and all these kind of things. And I think putting, for a contemplation, the magnifying glass on a mistake is a good learning experience. I wouldn't dwell on it, though. I think that is very important. It's like, okay, this happened, and maybe there's a certain sense of detachment, like from a meta stance. This happened, didn't work out, tough luck, let's try something else. What else could we do? And just be maybe a little bit matter of fact about it, and then move on. Don't stick with this. I made a mistake. I made 20 mistakes. Or I'm a nobody, or I'm bad, or I will never reach that. Those are the kind of internal kind of loops of thinking that we don't want to get into, but kind of matter of fact, okay, I learned something new. I'm not going to do this again in that situation. Next. Yeah. What's your take on this, Felicia?
First of all, I wish you had been my teacher. I did have a handful of special ones, but what you're saying is it lights up my heart to hear, you say it as a teacher, because it is so true. And I also think that if we do what you were just saying, Claudia, about sticking in the mistakes, I believe we can't just erase everything, because if we erase everything, then we're starting new, but we're going to probably make the same mistake again anyway, right? It's just in our DNA somehow until we learn how to work from them. But what I was going to say is, as you said, not to stay in the mistake, because that's where people end up suffering.
Mm.
And we can avoid the suffering by looking at it and seeing what was wrong with it, why it didn't work, whatever the situation. I keep playing in my head now what you said to your math students. So I'm trying to step away from a math problem, but looking at a situation, what was right, like I said earlier, in it, and what didn't work about it, and why it didn't work. Not only that it didn't work, but why it didn't work. And then once we realize why it didn't work, moving forward, so that one does not suffer in feeling a failure, because it's a feeling. Failure is a feeling. It's more a feeling than a truth. And then going back to the math, it doesn't work doesn't mean it's a failure. It just didn't work. There's another way. And it's an onus. I guess that's the right word. It's just too heavy. It's a burden to wear that word failure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe rephrasing it as a learning opportunity,
Right.
growth opportunity, a indicator from the universe, an indicator. Yeah,
Actually,
we got
actually,
data, more data. It's a data point. It's data point, and maybe bringing it back to a little bit more of a neutral ground that has not these introject associations that we carry along since childhood of what failure is and what failure means and what it says about us, as a person. Yes, Sandra?
it's just that I was thinking there was something that you said, and I was like, oh, I like that one. That sounds perfect. I was thinking that instead of calling it a mistake, call it an adaptation. Because it's really what it is. You're adapting to every choice that you have. So if one doesn't work, you adapt to it, you learn from it, and then you move to the other one. You learn from it, you adapt, and you go to the other one, because nobody ever starts from zero, right? So we take what we've learned and we take it to the next stage. We leave to the side what didn't work. And then, it was like, oh, an adaptation. I kind of like that. So instead of calling it a mistake, call it an adaptation.
Yeah, even though I think adaptation is what comes after you recognize that it didn't necessarily go to the adaptation is already part of the learning that you're doing. Yeah. So there's the realization kind of the mistake. There's the actual context.
But that's the first step. The realization is the first step. But we all have to, exactly. And then we go to the adaptation part. So it's like, oh, I like that. I like the fact that instead of calling it, okay, I'm adapting to my environment. We all have to adapt, right? And so it just feels better to say, I'm adapting. I'm not making mistakes. I like that one.
Life is giving me guidance right here. Yeah. Actually, there is a long time back, gosh, I was still in the US. I used to listen to this podcast by this Zen master. It was a lady called Sherry Huber. And she was very down to earth, not too much in the clouds. And whenever people would come and complain to her that things were not going right their way, right, she would always say, well, it's another opportunity for spiritual practice. Okay. She was fantastic. If you ever have a chance, maybe you find some archives of her somewhere. She was really fabulous. Sherry Huber, somewhere out in California. So an opportunity for spiritual practice, but an opportunity to take stock again, to analyze a little bit our assumptions, set straight our expectations, and try to figure out adapted, thank you, Sandra, adapted new ways of being flexible and reframing maybe the issue at hand. And then go from there. And isn't that reframing, that giving it another shot in different ways, truly what the learning is. This wiggling around it and just trying to figure it out. And guess what? It might not work out again, but then wiggle again, and you go on. That's really what it is. And if it becomes the default stance that that's what life is, just continuous. It doesn't work out. I try again. It doesn't work out, but maybe a little bit better. I try differently. Oh, this one didn't work at all. And you try again. That kind of, imagine you do that 100 times, and whether you succeed in the end doesn't even really matter. But after you do that 100 times, you're a very different person than when you started. Very different person than when you started. Sandra, what do you think? If we have done 100 of these videos, don't you think we'll have learned something?
There is so much, so much to say about that, because I do believe that one of my main goals was to, try to be as natural as possible, try to be more relaxed and make it a chat and this and that. Try to make it something where people could feel comfortable and being present, like Felicia is right now, and say, hey, I'd like to participate in that, because it actually really sounds like a conversation. And yes, I think that eventually when we get to that point where we say we have 30, 40, we're going to look back and say, wow, that is nothing to where we started, right? So I do like the idea of, in adaptation, we learn. And I think that if we were to see that really, like we mentioned before last week, that goals are, it's all based on fear. We're always going to have fear. Well, the same thing right now, right? Failure is based on fear. And you cannot remove that part of the process from the process itself. It's going to be there. It's part of the experience, right? To experience anxiety, and then for example, when you have failure, you also have the opposite, ambition, which is scarcity, right? The idea of scarcity. This is what kicks you in. This is what a lot of people feel motivated to. The idea of not having something pushes them into doing something better, right? So I'm pretty sure we're going to have a lot to talk about in our 100 episodes. Oh my God.
It's already not all that bad, Felicia, is it?
No, not at all.
Thank you. This is episode 6, by the way. So
yes,
we're still very new, very new.
Yeah, I didn't know you guys were doing this. I was curious what you two were doing.
Yeah.
So the thing is that yes, there's I might temper the language again. I absolutely understand, Sandra. There's anxiety, there's stress, there's ambition that might go wrong, and of the charts, there's scarcity. One of the ways to put it as a base thing that we kind of have to get used to is that we should become comfortable with the uncomfortable. Become comfortable with the uncomfortable. You will not be able to avoid it. And I think that so many of us get paralyzed by every little sign of discomfort, every little feeling of that your brain or your body, because a lot of times we feel there's no body, gives a sign of discomfort. And we instantly use that as an excuse not to do something, because we equate the fact that it's uncomfortable, maybe even with failure, that the very fact that we're uncomfortable might already say that we're on the wrong path. Yeah. And well, no, it ain't so. I really believe that it isn't so. It's an integral part of life. life.
Mhm.
You're going to be uncomfortable. It's not always just going to be silver platter and grass is greener and happy-go-lucky. And yeah, most people are not going to be bushy-tailed and bright-eyed until they are 90 years old. It's going to be uncomfortable. The whole process of life has some discomfort in it, which incidentally should tell us to be immensely grateful for all the good times. Immensely grateful for all the good times. So failure, yeah, there is emotion with it. Do you think that the more the more we emotionally invest ourselves into how much the success or failure of achieving something relates to us as a person says something about us as a person, affects the degree of emotion attached to it in terms of anxiety, stress, fear.
So for who is the question? For me or for Felicia?
The first
Take it
one
away, Felicia.
So if I understand the question correctly, then I think that the person that is more emotionally involved in what we call failure, the label of failure will, I go back to the word, will suffer more than the person that detaches from it emotionally.
Yeah, and the second part of the question is what makes us more emotionally involved our belief that the achievement or not of this says something about us as a person?
There are two sides of it. And I keep thinking as this conversation is being had about the person themselves, their thoughts about themselves, and their thoughts about themselves because of others around them. And I think that plays a big part into how one would answer your question. If one is looking at it, if one has full grasp of themselves without the views of others versus how they look at themselves and a situation because of a comparison to what others might think.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer sort of?
Yeah. And that brings up the whole issue of culture as well. How it is and how failure is viewed or failure is dealt with, or what failure says about a person is very different in different cultures. It's very different in different cultures.
I'm just thinking about so this one helped me out because I can't remember right now the word of the person that is not aware of what's going on around them and never blame themselves for their actions. It's always everybody else's fault. It's not a psychopath. I can't remember this personality style. Anyways, it goes very close to what Felicia was saying. So one of the things that I was explaining to you about that roller coaster that we go through when we're failing, part of it is us, and the other half is, like Felicia was saying, the other responsibility that we place on others for our benefit. And this is where I think it is based on how much it tells about us, how much accountability we put on things, right? If we start from the moment where we say, oh, it's not my fault, such and such didn't do their job. I couldn't help it. I was doing my things. I just had to wait for the other person to complete their job. And so it's never going to be your fault. It's always going to be everybody else's fault except yours. But when you have the opportunity to reflect on your mistakes, yeah, that's when it tells you how much accountability you're placing on the person, how much this person is willing to own their mistakes, right? And how much this person is going to learn off of it. So I think it's very important that, yes, we do see that difference between how much is your side and how much you're placing on the other side.
Yeah.
I do like that.
Yeah, if we look at culture, and I mean, there's national cultures that definitely affect that, but let's just look at a microcosm culture, like a team culture, culture. If a team has agreements and a way of doing things that is that allows people to venture and to try and to make mistakes and things like that, and they realize that if somebody makes a mistake, a wanted mistake, let's say, and because mistakes also come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, right? Some are really because you didn't pay attention, because you didn't care. That is a different kind of mistake than when you earnestly tried and did your best and it just didn't work out. I think that there's differences there too, in terms of the intent that you brought to the work that you did, I think is a variable in this. But imagine that the teammate really did the best they could with the information given in the context that they're in and so on. So the team could react to a failure or a mistake that results in different ways. Some teams go the scapegoat route. They will blame this one person for, well, you did the mistake, your name was on the form or the program or on whatever, it's your fault, and you need to be sanctioned or punished or fired or whatever it is. There's a very negative connotation. And the team that as a whole puts the blame, again, for this mistake on this one individual or this one sub-team or whatever it might end up being. There are other teams, however, that have maybe a more collectivist stance, where they could actually say, well, if this person made a mistake, maybe collectively we didn't think it through. Collectively, we didn't support this person as best as we could. We might not have given the right guidance. We might not have been observant enough when stuff started to go wrong. Okay, so now let's all sit together and analyze this mistake, why it happened, and then also as a team, let's adapt and try again. Right. So there's different things. I'm not saying all mistakes are created equal. That's not what I'm saying here. But there is, even in a microculture, vastly different ways that a mistake can be dealt with. I think that it's a complex subject. So how others look at it. If I am a teammate in a scapegoat team, it's very hard to own up to my mistake.
That's what I was thinking.
if however, and some actual cultures are like that, and there's some Asian cultures that come to work that always need to blame somebody to be responsible for what happened, and it's not a pretty sight very often. But if I'm then a teammate in a team that takes more this, well, let's learn from this, what really went wrong, and so on approach, much more psychologically safe, a team, or one that is in a learning mode, a team that knows how to learn and is resilient, then I'm much more able to then allow others to see my mistake, or maybe even speak up about it for myself, be proactive.
what you're saying, it just, I'm yet to know a team that behaves that way. But if there is one, kudos to your company, right? But usually, when it's only you that makes a mistake, you just, you're like, oh, okay. It was just me, and I'll, whatever. You just get over it and you move on. But when there's other people involved, that's absolutely true. That there's always somebody else that's going to have to take the blame, because there's always somebody that has to fall. That's the truth. And I've yet to know that company, that group that does not say, oh, it comes down to this person, and so this person has to go down. I've not known anybody also that can say, okay, well, this person made a mistake. We already talked about it, and we already know how to resolve it. I don't think people are sometimes also ready to make mistakes. You hope you're not going to make mistakes, but that's how I think also something that you have to be aware of, that something is always going to fail, and you don't prepare yourself for that stage. Yeah. And I think that if more of us were to, like you said, sit on our mistakes and think, okay, how could I have solved this? Give yourself the alternatives so that you can adapt easier and faster, right? It would be a total different thing.
Yeah, but even organizations need to evolve. And I mean, spiral dynamics has been around it's this theory and this model about how organizations evolve. And it has been around for 30 years now or whatever, just this whole model of evolution of organizations. And I think that it has to happen to some extent, especially I think in knowledge industry organizations that have to react so quickly, that are in such a changeable world, that it is inevitable that mistakes are going to happen, just based on context, even. Just based on context. And I think those are maybe going to lead the way into bringing away this organizational mind shift. Actually, Felicia, you're an organizational or company coach as well, right? What's your take on this?
So no, I'm not a company coach.
No?
I do small business.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. And the closest I've been to corporate was teaching for a gym, which became like a corporation. But I know enough about it from enough of my life, and I agree, there needs to be a change, and it starts with the leaders, as we know. It really starts with the leaders, and it's sort of what Sandra was saying, like knowing a place where there is no blame put, because the truth of the matter for me is, a mistake doesn't take one person. If that person wasn't informed properly, and the person, it starts from above and it starts from below. It goes both ways, right? So there is no one to blame, except to, once again, to look at the situation and to see how it unfolded and to work on it differently. I mean, I just love your explanation of what you did with your students with the math problems. It's looking at a situation holistically as a whole, and not the one piece that's right or the one piece that's wrong, but how did you get to that right piece? How did you get to that wrong piece? And it's not one person. So if we're looking at the team, it's everybody is responsible. If a team is to truly work, everybody must hold responsibility for the part they play.
Yeah, because this one person might have done this one thing, but it's the team's project.
Right.
And it's kind of like the team sits in this empty chair in the conference room with everybody else. It's a different entity. And that actually is one of the interesting things as a team coach, that you have the individual teammates, but you also have the team as a whole, and it's a whole different entity. One of my favorite ways of putting it, it's like knowing the team is like catching the wind. You absolutely know that it's there. You feel it on your skin. You hear the leaves rustling because the wind goes through the trees, and you see movement in the grass and things like that. You absolutely know that the wind is there, but try to catch it. On the other, and as well, you know if it's right, if you have good team dynamic, and you also absolutely know if it's wrong and you have bad team dynamic. Okay, so in this case of this mistake, I really think that very often, and again, we always pre-assume a little bit that there was not intentional sabotage, there was not ill intent. But if really in a positive spirit of value creation, a mistake was made, then the team owns it. And the team should own it. And I think that there has been a very large movement towards that, at least in the knowledge industries, tech teams, and things like that are so impacted by VUCA and just the volatility of the day. They have to be extremely fast to react and get very used to being resilient in the face of failure. Yeah.
And I think also everybody on the team must be valued,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what their contribution is.
I also wanted to talk about it, just, how also in failure, there's also the intention of reaching out and connecting to people. When you're working, you're doing your thing, right? Usually the intention of what you're doing is to succeed, right? It's to be relatable. It's to be seen as part of. It's to have adaptation, to belong, right? And when we fail, and you see yourself and compare yourself to others, you suddenly feel that everybody's looking at you. You suddenly feel you don't belong. You're being judged. And you don't know how to get over it. There's this shame, right? There's all of these emotions attached to failure that it's terrible. How many people have we not known that a mistake can cost them their entire life, their entire way of living, families, house, everything. Everything. It's their identity. And that, losing who you are as a person over day and night, it's one of the worst things that can happen to anybody, because you lose yourself, you lose who you are, right? And so in success, the opposite, well, I would say it's the opposite of failure. There's a need to connect, right? And the moment that we fail, that's when we say, oh, now the popular girls, they're going to see that I made a mistake. Now they're going to be judging me. So how many things are not involved when we make mistakes? Everything around us, our environment, our social environment, it's the, what are they going to say? It's this thing about how you're going to look in front of others. I think that is one of the things that keeps people from moving on faster. If we would all just focus more on ourselves versus the environment around us, we would not have such a hard time learning, adapting, and moving on. Right? But it's that thing that you want to be relatable, so you're doing the same thing as almost everybody else, but guess what? It doesn't always work for you. So I was just thinking about that, how also in failure, there's also this need of being accepted, of reaching out to others.
Felicia, what does that bring up for you?
Like I'm in a coaching session here. Something that Sandra said is also failure goes back to level of confidence. And so when she talked about like the girls, right, the group of girls, and the truth is that most individuals feel like failures. They just don't admit to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's those that step outside the norm that end up feeling, sometimes they feel like failure because they're not part of the norm, but they end up being the leaders very often because so many people don't have the courage to step beyond what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the very beginning of what I said. It's about failure is a word, it's a feeling that has been put on us by society.
Mm-hmm.
What is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And when that can be removed from one's life, that feeling of judgment, let's say, that feeling of wanting to fit in, then that feeling of failure can go away too. But that's a life journey for most of us, for sure. Because it's something that just keeps sitting in my head from something you said, Claudia, and looking at your beautiful plants, is that the seed
Yes, they're real. Yes, they're real, by the way.
The seed has to go through a lot of dirt to come up and blossom and be beautiful, right?
Mm.
So we do go through things that are uncomfortable, that to get to the beautiful parts of our lives. So we come in fully loaded as children, beautiful, right? And we go to this place of innocence again as we become older.
Yeah.
In between is the discomfort.
Yeah.
Something very vulnerable. Yeah, that's very true.
Thank you for that, Felicia. If you allow me, I want to touch again back also on what you said, Sandra. Marshall Rosenberg, our esteemed father of nonviolent communication, I think in 2015 or so, said the following quote. Let me. That others may very well push our buttons, but they didn't install them. Right. So I think that if we are so very hurt by the judgment of others, it's maybe because we judge ourselves very harshly. If we feel the strong sense of being pointed out, of not being, that others think that we are not good enough, maybe it's because we in ourselves lack this confidence and this heightened self-concept. Very often, what we react to strongly in our environment is what we are already raw to ourselves. It hurts because it's already scar on our life, or something that we don't feel well enough in ourselves. Because I'm sure if we think a little bit, we can find people and anecdotes of folks that have been going through a failure, through something that really didn't work out. But they were strong. They stood up. They had a good laugh about it. Maybe they cried for 5 minutes, and then they went on. And weirdly enough, all those I told you so voices in the environment and all those negativity things, or also all the Schadenfreude around them, thank you very much, left them cold. Because they knew that in themselves, they were standing in their power. Yes, they made a mistake, and they were able to abstract from all of that. And even if they had been, God forbid, in one of those teams where they had to take responsibility and were fired, they would turn around and not have it diminish their self-concept and just look for another job. I have known people like that, you know, even despite really being in the worst situation, they kept being strong in who they were. Right. So essentially, there's also this other saying that we deserve what we tolerate. And I think that there's also some truth to that. If we tolerate others judging us based on one failure or one mishap or whatever happened, despite our best intentions, if we accept that, if we tolerate that, then, you know, we have to live with it to some extent.
Yeah, that's very true. It's but I think also, again, it comes down to it's what we default to do. And I've only known this kind of personality that I'm still trying to remember what's the name. How it's called? I'm sorry. These are the only ones that can actually move and not worry about what everybody else says about them, right? And in a way, I've always admired that kind of personality, but just because they have no shame. And again, shame is probably one of the biggest enemies of failure. It's what brings a lot of people down. And so I don't know how many times you ladies have experienced shame, but I can only remember over and over and over, God knows how many times, shame, right? Shame because I really wanted to pay attention to the class, and then suddenly I realized I wasn't paying attention. You know, I was so focused on trying to learn that I just couldn't focus. How many times did I not promise myself that this semester was going to be different? How many times did I not say I was going to read 3 books at least in a year? And I didn't even read more than 5 pages, right? And so I would like for people to see that with every failure, really, truly, and especially us 3 that have businesses, we have our own businesses. We know that failing is nothing, right? It's just a tryout. It's an adaptation, and another adaptation of another adaptation. And it's just you trying to do the best you can to get things right. And there's no shame. Only you are the only person that you're judging yourself, that really truly put that shame on yourself, because we are so judgmental on ourselves. We are so harsh on ourselves that truly, really, I've realized how little people around us worry about what we're doing. Only us are the only ones that we think our perception, our beliefs of what other people are thinking is what's the problem.
Well said, Sandra. Well said. Can you imagine, ladies, that we spent an hour together and it just flew by? And this is so great.
It's nice.
I would like to give Felicia just one more time the opportunity to maybe, what would be your key takeaway from today?
Well, first, thank you for letting me be here and letting me speak.
Thank you.
Rosie, very moving. That life is just a balancing act. That there is no good, there is no bad, there just is. And when we can accept that for ourselves and respect others, we might be in a better place as humanity.
Very, very well said. Truly, Felicia, thank you for coming today.
Yes.
Sandra and I were truly, truly happy to have you. Hopefully you'll join us sometime. So that actually concludes this week's episode. I hope that it brought value to some of you people out there listening or watching this replay of this live. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel and press the notification button to, not miss out on any content. We try our best. And also, if you have suggestions or questions for future episodes, always get in touch with us. Our contact info is going to be in the comments or in the description.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sandra. We will see them again next week, will we?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And thank you again, Felicia, for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Yes. Always such great ideas. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.